glimpse of the future and where mobile may fit in. The most important thing about this remarkable period is the period of time. We live in the new Renaissance, and the mobile is the Renaissance device. It is the device that will help us find a new world and solve the problems of the future. If we can make it do that, it is the mobile for good. But it doesn't necessarily have to do that. We have to ensure that we operate it, that we build the systems and the capabilities that will do that. We live in this most remarkable time of the coming down of walls. It started around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was also the time, incidentally, that mobile phones began to develop. The first text messages and communication was after this time. It's a period where curtains are being opened, where we are connected as a species like we haven't been for 200,000 years since we exited Africa. It's a time of change which has transformed all of our lives, and not least mine. I was able to go back to South Africa because the walls of apartheid came down and worked with this incredible man, President Mandela. But this was happening around the world. 70 countries became democratic in the 1990s. It was not the unique experience I thought it was. It was a global trend, and of course it was associated as well with the opening up of China, the ending of dictatorships across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. A completely new time to be alive, a time like the Renaissance. And in this time, it continues to evolve at an unnerving and incredible speed. And we see in the Arab Spring this constant evolution. The question, of course, is where is it going? Now, while this political and economic and ideological transformation was happening, built by technologies like the mobile phone and internet capabilities, there was also an extraordinary improvement in our capabilities to live long and healthy lives. 2 billion more people in the planet since the early 1990s. So we are more densely connected, physically and virtually, than ever in history. Over 2/3 of the world's population, those depicted in yellow here, living less than an hour away from a major city, with access to everything that we have access to. When people become connected, they evolve more rapidly. They throw away bad ideas and they take on new ideas, and economic progress happens more quickly. That's the Schumpeterian view of creative destruction, but it happens. And the more quickly we can throw out our bad ideas and take on new ideas, the more quickly we can make progress. We can overcome poverty and disease in our lifetimes because we have this connectivity, because the walls have come down, because we understand that by sharing ideas, we have collective genius. There's genius because there's 500 million more people educated in the world that are released. But there's also genius because the fragments of everyone's capability are being connected in a way that was unimaginable only 20 years ago. So we all have a capability, and when you connect this capability, you get leapfrogging. And you can escape the slums of Mumbai or Sao Paulo or elsewhere and contribute and learn and become part of this new renaissance. We see it in the data. This in green is population growth, in red, income growth. The income growth is exponential, the population growth arithmetic. For the first time in history, income growth has exceeded population growth despite this extraordinarily rapid and unprecedented population growth. There was a period about 1,000 years ago when income growth exceeded population growth. That period, like this period, was a period of connectivity. When Europe met Asia, when ideas that had taken millennia to develop were quickly shared, and we're in that period again. There was another period, the Gutenberg period, the Renaissance. People went from writing to printing. 1 million books printed in the first year. Ideas about religion, ideas about politics, ideas about science. The old Tate houses some of the wonderful work from that period. The Michelangelos, the other achievements, Botticelli's. It was a most remarkable time of creativity. Massive progress, but it ended in the bonfire of the vanities. The burning of books, Inquisition, the rejection of change, and then the mass reproduction of slavery, one of the greatest travesties that humanity has ever known. The question of our period is, are we able to harness this? Are we able to manage change in a way that has not been done before? Are we able to understand this connectivity and this opportunity and use it for good? There are big choices to be made. In the background to this massive period of change we're going into, this revolution of change, is uncertainties that are all around. Uncertainties of a scale which we've never known before, not least on demography. We don't know whether the world's population will be 12 billion or 9 billion in 38 years' time, 2050. This makes a massive difference. We know life expectancy is increasing dramatically. While you're here today, your life expectancy will increase by about an hour. That's the pace of progress because of what you're learning and because of what's happening in the labs. It's a most extraordinary period of change. That means there'll be 700 million people over the age of 60 in Asia alone by 2025. With this comes massive declines in fertility, an absolute collapse. And John's here from The Economist, the collapse of fertility, plummeting. The whole world except Africa going below replacement level. And when you run this through in Victoria's home country, you see a massive change. We need to think about how we're going to manage the future of these societies, very high dependency ratios. And what this, of course, also demonstrates is that women are wiser than men. They live longer. They make more rational decisions. They don't stick as many knives into each other and kill each other in as many ways or themselves. So we have big structural change. We have gender imbalances. And this is different everywhere. But the peculiarities are important. In China, 13 boys for 10 girls in many provinces now at the age of 1. When people have fewer children and live in societies that are gender biased, they decide to have boys. We need to ensure that we have a better structure. It's no accident that Vodafone is run by someone who's a migrant and the chairman is a migrant, and all our great companies in the world are driven by migrant. Half the Silicon Valley startups, half the patents, and of course Nobel Prize winners, Academy Award winners, and others. This is a time when connectivity of physical people mattered most, but we're moving to a period of virtual. The US healthy structure is because half the children in the US today are being born to migrant families, even though they're only 10% of the population. This is the opportunity of people moving and sharing ideas and solving problems elsewhere that couldn't be solved. And we need to solve them, and we need to solve them for my generation as we get older, because the advances in physical regeneration are about 20 years behind those on mental. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, these things will become key challenges, and we need a mobile system that is going to help us manage this over this period. Because of this rapid economic growth, because of this churn, when you compound the values going forward, China becomes like Southern Europe today within about 30 years, and the whole world, or 2 billion people, move into this period of from about $4,000 to about $7,000 per capita over the next 15 years, peaking their consumption of energy, of water, of land, and moving to more and more processed food up the food chain, from grains to processed meat, all the way up to your pizzas and packaged foods. This will peak the demand for resources. We're moving into a perfect storm, not only on the demographics, but also on the consumption of all our natural resources and, of course, our carbon emissions. How do we manage this? What role can mobile play? We have to ourselves manage this period, because as China becomes the biggest economy, 80% of economic activity in Asia and emerging markets by 2050, already half of economic activity in Asia, we move into a period of political paralysis. The old leadership are incapable, preoccupied with crisis management, and the new leadership, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, not yet ready to lead. So a dangerous handover period, a perfect storm of political incapacity at the global level, and we see that in all areas. Increasingly, we know what sort of things have to be done to manage the world, but our leadership is not able to manifest the changes required. So we have to do it through our connections. We need to come up with better ideas. Innovation will accelerate even more rapidly. This will be the period, the next 15 or so years, of turbocharged innovation. We will see more rapid innovation than the world has ever known because there are more brains connected, more mobility, and more market opportunity on the other side of this than ever before in history. And that will create the laboratory for change. Change which is unpredictable. There are two dimensions of globalization which will be less welcome. While the majority of the world's inhabitants have benefited, and the number of poor has declined absolutely by about 300 million over the last 15 years, life expectancy has increased by 20 years, illiteracy has gone down by about half, from about 50% to 24%. Progress the world has never seen before. While that has happened for the majority of the world's inhabitants, about 1 billion people have been left out. Globalization has been associated with growing inequality between countries and within countries if you take the full spectrum. This is Sao Paulo, but we know it could equally be Johannesburg, Manila, Mumbai, or many other places. This leads to incohesive societies, societies which are fragmented and fractious, national politics which is unable to look outward, a rejection of globalization because it is seen to bring bad, not good. Xenophobia, nationalism, protectionism are the response to crises that we perceive to come across our borders. All the global challenges of the future will be national challenges. What matters to us in our future will not come from within our borders, it will come from abroad. Systemic risks, this cascading across borders, across sectors, as we've seen with the financial crisis. This was the first of the 21st century crises. It was about technological change, the creation of instruments that were not understood by the managers, and the super spreading around the world. So a pensioner in the neighborhood here that we are in London was affected by decisions in the US. This is the characteristic of the future. What's remarkable about finance, and that's my world, is we think we're the elite of the global system. 20,000 PhDs jobs were about global financial stability in the global institutions. We meet all the time. We have the best data. And because the central banks and treasuries print the money, we pay ourselves better than most other civil servants, globally and nationally. We didn't see it coming. The pace of change and structural change and systemic risk will be constantly surprising. We will see it in the movement as well of other global bads. The swine flu that started in Mexico City, spread around the world, was in 130 countries within 6 weeks, exactly mirroring airline traffic and the hubs and nodes that are created in that. So the new hubs and nodes of the system, together with the dual uses of technology, need to be a concern for all of those that care about connectivity. Because connectivity is not only about spreading good, it can spread bad. And so how you manage the upside and harvest it and ensure it doesn't lead, as is the case with DNA synthesizing, which is declining exponentially in cost, to the creation of bads is absolutely key. The financial crisis needs to be our wake-up call. It needs to teach us that as we manage these global challenges, we're going to have to ourselves, through our connectivity, be able to consider the consequences. Emerging markets have to develop. They have to go through this energy transformation. It's a wonderful thing. It will lead to many, many people escaping poverty and leading healthier and longer lives. But at the same time, it will fill the atmosphere further with carbon and other greenhouse gases. How we manage this transition, how we spread the technological change and manage the tragedy of the commons. Economists for years have known that what is rational individually is not rational collectively. When we are connected and do things together that for ourselves make sense, they don't always lead to good outcomes. We've seen this with the oceans, where fishermen individually feed their families, but together they kill all the fish. This is an auction in Tokyo about 6 weeks ago of a rare type of tuna that went for $750,000. People are prepared to pay $1,000 for a plate of sushi. Next year, I have no doubt they will pay $2,000. There will be more and more fish with more high-tech fishermen chasing the remaining tuna, and there will be none. The market will not give you the response to scarcity and the global commons collapse which is required. We need other things. Governments as well are incapable. This is a project I very unsuccessfully worked on when I was at the World Bank. 6 countries drawing water from the ocean, doing the right thing, feeding their people, collectively a failure. This commons, the Aral Sea, has collapsed. But it was a rational decision on each country's part to allow that. They had to get more joined up. And so when I look at mobile, I think about connectivity. I think about this wonderful new opportunity that is going to lead to change, that's going to allow us to think about connectivity and how we're going to stop it falling apart. The old system is moving at an evolutionary pace. The changing in the global institutions, the structure of global governance, and even of national governance. There's a lot of reform, but it's really about media opportunities and rearranging the deck chairs. So we need to think about how we go forward. People who believe that the past can be somehow retrieved, that was better, are living in a romantic dream. It was terrible. People died at much greater numbers of many more great diseases. Globalization has brought benefits which have been unimaginable in history. The question is, how does this become sustained? How do we become hyper-connected, but not hyper-vulnerable in the process to cascading risk and shock? How do we ensure that this is a time where everyone can share in the benefits and that globalization can be seen as a driver of technical change which solves people's problems for them, not becoming the source of shock and risk because we are more connected, but the source of extraordinary opportunity. And we know with mobiles we can do that. We also know that in the labs there are incredible things. This is from our work in our plant sciences group in the Oxford Martin School, which is a group of about 450 people now in Oxford, across disciplines, trying to solve the world's problems. We've doubled the root area of rice to make it more able to withstand the challenges. This is mobile connections that are passing money in small microloans across the world. People solving each other's problems by being connected. And it's happening in all areas. The online ability to learn, to become literate, and to contribute is greater than ever in history. So the opportunity not only to become part of the world, but to contribute to it, to solve problems, is there. We're developing apps. This is from our biodiversity group in Oxford. And there are many others around the room, and I'm sure you know of them, who are developing capabilities to take a picture of something, to hear it, to build a global biodiversity database that will teach us much more and also lead us to appreciate much more what's around us. We're doing it in finance, where we created, and there was a picture of M-Pesa, which Vodafone's been very involved in before. New capabilities in finance, which allow many new things. In health, there are revolutions which will enable us to manage all sorts of diseases, to reduce the burden of healthcare. This cost of healthcare is growing at over 2.5% higher than GDP growth rates. It will strangle the economies of the rich countries and the developing countries unless we can find new ways of managing health, and particularly dealing with the whole pyramid, from the base of leading healthy lives and how we use mobile connectivity to make ourselves healthier, but through the chronic management of diabetes and other diseases, all the way to intense care. We know it can be done at all levels. We know that the social machines, and we're very involved in crowdsourcing with Zoo Universe and many others, that the social machines that are being developed bring people in to collectively do citizen science, to collectively solve problems, and to become aware of the challenges. So we can see already, whether it's discovering new galaxies or new cures for cancer, that crowdsourcing works. We need it to work too for solving global problems. We need people to become aware of what's happening around them and to find the solutions to the governance challenges. By being more joined up, we can solve collective action problems. So this mobile for good is the most powerful possibility of the world. This is the system, and this is a graphic of the mobile connectivity in the UK. This is the system that we need to keep the integrity of. But we not only keep the integrity of, we need to ensure that the revolution of our time is at least equivalent to the revolution started by Bell. What he did at that time changed the nature of society and the capability. I believe that the power of mobiles now is even more powerful, and that we can use them, and this conference provides that remarkable opportunity to ensure that we address the greatest challenges of our time through mobile for good. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well played. All right. Can I now introduce to the stage Robert Madelin, who's the Director General for DG Connect, Communications Networks, Content and Technology. Dr. Mike Lynch, thank you, sir. Dr. Mike Lynch, the founder of Autonomy. Thank you, sir. And John Micklethwait, Editor-in-Chief of The Economist. Robert, if we can start with you. I know you've got a short sort of speech to make, and then we'll move on, Mike, and then John, and we'll pick up and see if we can address some of the issues that Andrew raised, some of the questions that I believe the audience has on where we are and how we manage change going forward. Robert, I'm going to start with you then.
Okay, so normally I've got a 90-second video.
Do we have that?
Thanks. So to pick up the questions that Ian has addressed, I think that the video you've just seen, and I showed it, I hesitated when Rajneesh said no more videos, but I show it because it shows, I think, that the solutions to the global problem, so let's say stress, a global problem, may well come in non-scale ways. So this video, this app works. The UN listed it as one of the top 10 health apps this year. I'm proud to show it because it's an EU-financed piece of research and innovation. But it may not need to get to scale as long as it reaches everybody. And it may not need to be the only solution. So at some levels, what's wonderful about mobile is that the good can be decided by us. The market may be very rich. It may operate in a way that is completely different. If I then look at at the top end of Ian's pyramid, we've got case management. Pain you can't do on your own. Acute pain for cancer sufferers, recently operated patients, you need the clinician to be involved. UBH here in the UK, again linked across Europe, but they're doing it by themselves, are developing a pain management app which gives the patient power, but which keeps the clinician involved. So you have clinical integrity as well as empowerment, and the responsibilities have to be allocated just as in a face-to-face doctor-patient relationship. So those are just two illustrations that you can pick both of those. You might need both at the same time. And if you look at this, health, well-being, we've done that. Let's not forget that fun can be good. Angry Birds is being used by clinicians in Europe to treat ADHD. So we mustn't be too prissy about this. There's a continuum between the stuff that we feel is a waste of time and the stuff which pain management consultants in the NHS need to have at their fingertips. Similarly, I would agree with Ian that government is shrinking. And I've been a bureaucrat all my life, but government is shrinking. Government, at best, will survive as a platform, an enabler for smart communities, for citizens' actions, but cities can't be smart and communities can't be smart unless they have better data at their fingertips, knowledge of what their peers are doing, and multi-criteria decision support tools on their phones. So the challenges are really big. And it means not just that mobile is converging. I thought the initial slides had a lot of people talking into phones, not so many people looking at them, and increasingly that's going to change. The devices, the Internet of Things, will be talking to each other. The whole thing has to get faster, so we need the broadband speed, and we need also that the platforms are open. At the moment, one of the problems of scale is that each app is on a different chassis. We need some chassis onto which we can build all the apps we need. The individual then has to be at the center. One of the things about this, and I pick up what Vittoria said at the beginning, technology is the help, but it's still for us. If we're going to conceive this in a way that makes society want to take it up, it has to be me-centric. And that means we have to deal with the people who don't have a phone, who are subject to the digital divide, who are digitally illiterate. And whether we're literate or not, we need a sense of control and privacy and trust. If I start using pain management tools and then I start getting lots of adverts on my phone for medication over the internet, I may lose trust in the system. At the moment, there's a huge growth potential. Even in Europe, half of us, 2/3 sometimes, will be using mobile for entertainment and for shopping, but only 1/3 of us are using it for healthcare. Health is nonetheless in the top 10 and it's growing, so the good goods are growing. And I think if I come to the challenges, I just want to say, I mean, Ian put up patients like me, I've put I want great care. Curation is the key. Where do I find trusted advice? I want great care in patients like me. Patients are doing it for themselves. Search, health apps, that's the low end of the market, I would say. Regulation, and somebody mentioned the FDA. Personally, I would say let's avoid assuming that regulation is the trust mark people need because it will slow the time to market. But a more explicit policy around responsible deployment of tools, a sort of CSR charter for mobile for good, could help to build the trust without the regulation. And I think that is going to be a key part of the problem. My last thought in response to the speakers so far is that most of the things we need to do, better rules for e-health, more cloud computing, prizes, research, money, security, we're thinking about that. We need to have a strategic approach. We need to conceive a mobile good future and not a series of mobile good tools. And therefore, I just want to leave you with a commercial for Futurium, which we launched last week, which is an online site where you can come and join us and say, the mobile good I want is X. And I believe that if together we can have a conversation, we will find where the common chassis can be on which we build the other things, and then we'll get scale.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. Mike, take us down the route of innovation, as you will, as it were, a catalyst to solve the sort of challenges that we are talking about here. Certainly when you started Autonomy, the mobile world was a very different world. As we move into what we believe, if we believe Ian is correct, that this is a mobile renaissance, how does mobile technology fit in the world of innovation?
Well, the important thing to understand about mobile is it's now becoming the dominant form for connectivity and information around the world, and that is leading to a very different approach to how innovation and effects are happening. Now, there's two distinct areas that you need to break apart here. One is what I call the absolute effect. And the absolute effect is the very obvious one. So suddenly, people perhaps in a second world country can get access to information, perhaps about a healthcare problem that they haven't had. I actually had a very direct experience of this when I ended up one Saturday morning walking around one of my fields and seeing that rare breed cow was having trouble in the middle of a birth, and I rang up the cowman, who's an expert on all of this and done it for many years, and I couldn't get hold of him. And so I ended up delivering the calf using ropes in full James Herriot style with the help of an iPhone and the University of Utah. God bless them. But that's absolute information made available in a way that it would not have been before. And another area that's very easy to understand, I think, is the effect on infrastructure. So if we look at something like mobile banking, it's obviously much quicker to create an infrastructure which is based on virtual technologies than having to go and build bank branches and develop something like that for the world. So those are the sort of obvious things that people talk about. But what we also need to look at is the effect of the relative and the effect of stability on what's going on. See, the world is going through a change which has been going on certainly for the last 2,000 years. If you lived 2,000 years ago in Britain, not a lot happened. You didn't travel very far. Occasionally someone might come to your village with some news, but the information flow to you was very limited. And what's happened over time, and we talked about the printing press and then of course the telephone and now mobile connectivity, is the amount of information that can come to you has gone up exponentially. And we have a very interesting situation when you look at that from a point of view of a technologist, which is systems are either processor bound or they're I/O bound. It's how fast can they think about stuff or how fast can they get information in and out. And human history shows us absolutely that so far we have been I/O bound. The human brain is still doing amazing things and creativity. And the more connectivity and information you get to it, the more it does, the more it creates, the faster it innovates. So we have an I/O bound system, and mobile is the crucial exponential opening up of that. And it's very obvious, if I wanted to design a piece of hardware when I was at university, I would have to send off a stamped addressed envelope to whoever made the chip, and about 4 weeks later I would get back a little diagram that told me how to use it. Now, that's instantaneous. But more importantly, rather than just getting information, I can get put in touch with someone in San Francisco who's just built something using this, and I can get them to give all of the knowledge that I need. So what you've got is this absolute explosion in the ability to solve the I/O bound problem of the human brain. And this is leading to the creation of massive social graphs, where there's an interconnectivity with people all over the world, and that can be on a basis, and you look at how particularly younger people use things like instant messaging and text technologies as though they were standing next to you. And we see the ideas of things like crowdsourcing. Suddenly we have all these brains being brought to bear on a problem. But there is a fundamental problem here, and it comes from, first of all, the relative nature of things. If we go back to my Suffolk village 150 years ago, the productivity of the most productive person tilling the land to the least productive was a small factor. You take about a factor of 2 or something like that for an able-bodied person. Now, the factor of probability, because you're no longer I/O bound, has gone up. You could argue in the software world it's 100 to 1. Your best software writer is worth 100 times your median one. So we've got this sudden breaking out of the relative value. And if you look at that social graph, social graphs at the moment do not connect beyond certain types of countries, for example. So very strong social graphing between the US and the UK, but actually between, say, the UK and Tanzania, it will be very weak. So what you're getting is a breaking off. And the problem is this is massively magnified by that productivity differential. So we've got a race here between the benefit of the absolute and breaking down the barriers of infrastructure with this relativism. Let's talk about crowdsourcing. It's often put forward as a solution to everything. Well, the simple line to that is, would you get on an aeroplane that had been developed by the cloud? Well, you wouldn't. You want an expert. And so the danger that we have in all this noise of all of these voices is, do we start to lose expertise? And that comes down to our institutions. There's a very great quote by Edward O'Brien, and he says that we have the emotions of the Paleolithic. We still love and hate very much as our evolutionary ancestors did. We have the institutions of the medieval. So a lot of our political systems, our banking systems, the way in which we operate collectively have grown out of medieval ideas and they haven't moved very fast. But we now have the technology of the gods. And this is leading to stability issues. Because systems can be stable because they're inherently stable or because you correct them. If you get in a car and you close your eyes, you take your hands off the wheel on a straight road and you hit the accelerator, you will crash because the car is inherently unstable, and what happens is you can react to it faster than the change in stability and you drive the car straight. Well, what's happening now is everything's getting so fast because of the connectivity that we're moving from a world which grew up in our medieval institutions that required us to be like the car driver. So when the financial system's going a bit iffy, we kind of give it a kick and a prod and we pull some plugs out. Well, it's all happening too fast now. We're getting to a situation where our systems have to be fundamentally stable, and that is a completely different model. And if we don't do that, what we're going to see is more political shocks. We're going to see more financial problems. The EU and Angela Merkel perhaps can't actually, through the political process, react fast enough to the fact that the system's getting faster. It still takes you 30 minutes to get across Manhattan in the cab. If you're going to stare a bank boss down in order to get something happening, that doesn't get any faster. So we've got big issues around stability, and we've got big issues around relative versus the absolute in terms of parts of the world breaking away from others. So we've got a period of great change ahead of us, and it's one where a lot of the fundamentals about how we've done things are going to have to change. We have to be moving at a speed where the technology is getting exponentially faster. The Arab Spring, I make no value judgment on it, but that happened because things could happen faster than those regimes could react to them. But on the other side of the equation, if we're going to get decisions made about complex issues like energy policy on the basis of what goes on Twitter and Facebook, perhaps we're no longer valuing the true expertise of the people that really understand, make those decisions. The chief vet, I would hope, knows more about animal disease than a B-list celebrity. Yet in this new world, that weighting is becoming questioned. So amazing opportunities, amazing challenges, and that's before we even look to the next wave of technology that mobile is going to enable, things like augmented reality and the Internet of Things, which are going to move us again into a world that looks very different to what we're used to.
Thank you, Mike. John, a new renaissance. Is mobile really the new device that will help us find a new world, do you think?
Well, I think if you listen to what people have said, you can take sort of some things rather clearly out of it. Perhaps the most remarkable is the idea that Lynch can somehow produce a calf out of a... it didn't actually say whether it didn't say whether it survived, but that alone is an image you can take away. I think that if you look at the evidence which we've heard this morning, basically you see two rather clear things. The first, if you look at the emerging world, the evidence is pretty clear, and the economic evidence is also pretty clear, is that most of the macro studies people have done on mobile technology show roughly, and this is rough numbers, for every 10% increase of mobile penetration, you get roughly 0.8% of GDP, and there are different numbers and different things. It's somewhere around there, and most of the micro studies, including from what I can understand the LBS one, show that this isn't just coincidence, there's kind of causation, that this is actually because people do use mobile phones in ways that make themselves richer, make themselves healthier, make themselves work better. But, and this is where the Renaissance stuff runs into trouble, and this is arguably where Ian's Bonfire of the Vanities begins to become an issue, there are two lots of problems. One, in the emerging world, the mobile technology doesn't solve everything. It helps enormously, but it doesn't make up for the fact that India has a useless government, that roads are bad, that corruption is rife. All those things, mobile can get you around some of them, but not all of them. In the developed world, very much as Mike said, mobile, it's less clear now where the exponential add-ons are coming on. Indeed, in America at the moment, there's a huge debate, I think wrongly, I tend to be on the same side as Mike and Ian in this, but there is a big debate which you have to face about the idea that innovation is not causing the same degree of success that it used to have, that innovation isn't as useful to society as it was in the 20, 30 years up to sort of the 1970s or 80s, and particularly over the century before, that the things we're getting now are just add-ons. You go to your kitchen, it's not stratospherically different in the same way as before. People even look at loos and say, is there any innovation which is as great as that? So I think there is a kind of debate going on at the moment in the developed world about, you know, what is the extra add-on of this? Is it really quite such a Renaissance thing? And on top of that, as well as Mike also pointed out, you have this sort of systemic fear that one of the things that mobile is doing is making everything go much quicker, and governments, in their medieval way, are unable to keep up with it.
Mike, where do you expect to see the next wave of innovation come from? Is it existing large players, smaller niche firms? Are we looking at partnerships, which I know the audience will be fascinated today to hear from you about partnerships between the two from the ground up? Where do you see the push here?
Well, I often get criticized when I make the next comment, but when you actually look at what young people, and that's the bit I get criticized for, and by that I mean people who are under 27 are using mobiles for and how they're running their lives, it's fundamentally different. And in fact, there's a whole set of terminology that is used there that none of us looking out there would know, that is completely common currency. What that means is that you have a group there that is thinking in ways which are radically different. So I think a lot of the really interesting innovation is going to come from that group. That means inherently it's more likely to start out in very small businesses. What you have is the current R&D model where these small businesses start and then larger businesses try and buy them in order to do that. So you end up with a sort of partnership model. But you know, the great thing about technology is there's always this turnover. Whoever's at the top is by no means guaranteed not to be displaced by some upstart. And what we're in is in a time of absolute change at the moment. And you know, I look at things like, as I mentioned, augmented reality, and you just think the possibilities for this are phenomenal. But I also know that it's going to be people who are 23, 24 that can look at the world in a different way and perhaps start thinking about those things.
Go on. Yes.
Just to pick up on the augmented reality point, the video was an augmented reality tool, and it's interesting how little you need to augment the two-dimensional experience to change the way we respond to the world. So I think that my first comment is this is already happening. The second is that I kind of think there are some problems where if the Westphalian and the Bretton Woods world fails, the bottom-up mobile solution won't fix it. You know, the global financial crisis, yes, there is a failure of global leadership. I think the WEF surveys this year agree with Ian's insight. And I don't think mobile for good solutions exist. But what you're going to see is a disintermediation of big government. Citizens can do it for themselves if they are empowered to. And I think the single, no regrets, every town and village initiative that we're not yet taking would be to put the web presence within the reach of every would-be actor. The experience coming back from South Africa, people saying, help me to set up a website, it's the same for 60% of SMEs in every country in Europe. And they can't quite do it. And if you go there and you set up the website, but you don't stay and hold their hand, you come back a month later, the business model hasn't changed. So making it possible for everybody to make a start, and society will fix it.
I think we have to be, again, my role is to be the cynic in this, but I happen to agree that actually once you apply mobile technology to things like government, in the end it will turn. In the end, people will look at the education results around the world and realize that their school isn't very good, that their hospital isn't performing as well. But the basic fact is all the evidence is the other way around at the moment. Government has kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger and continues to do so despite the debts it's accumulated. And one reason why is because the sort of things that government does, like health and education, have so far not proved adaptable to these sort of technologies in the same way as other things. So the private sector has leapt ahead, but one reason why the public sector keeps on taking out more and more of the economy is because its productivity is so much behind. And so, yes, it's possible, that these things will happen, and maybe in 20 years' time we'll look back at events like this and think this was wonderful and it set the scene for everything that was to come. It's also possible that we'll look back on it in exactly the same way as when we published things about death of distance 20 years ago. It had a dramatic effect on the private sector, on the public sector. It has not had the same kind
Well,
of...
how do you fix that? I mean, Ian, how do you fix that?
Revolution. I mean, Ian's examples that the mobile renaissance coincides with the fall of the wall, with the end of apartheid. These were bloody events. They did that. The power holders resisted it. If you talk about the failure of systems, it's the French Revolution as well. You know, the terror spread in France because the government didn't get it. So, sitting here as a paid official, you feel nervous, but actually either the private sector that gets it helps the public sector to get it, or there'll be a revolution.
I think there's also, you have to be very careful about your definition of productivity. The old example that was always used was, a bank has an ATM, does it actually increase productivity? Well, you take healthcare. You can look at healthcare from a macro point of view, or you can say, well, cancer survival rates are going up and up and up. So yes, we are choosing to pay more for healthcare, but we are actually getting some phenomenal results from it. And those results come from this background of information exchange. So you look at a subject, for example, at the moment, like genomics research, without the connectivity that we now have in the modern world, that research area would not be moving at the rate it is. And if that produces benefit for healthcare, it's certainly true that you'll end up still having the crisis of spending as a percentage of GDP, but at the end of the day, people will be living longer with a better quality of life. So it's an interesting debate about whether it's succeeding or not.
The answer is it's somewhere in between. I should have allowed for that, but nothing, I think, really accounts for the fact that America's spending 16% of GDP on healthcare and getting results which are not as good as they would hope.
Yeah.
Can I just ask all of you what you believe the sort of top two things are that are inhibiting the good in mobile for good then? Starting off with you, Ian, so that we've got something to work on as we press on. We're gonna look at some case studies in the next session, but just what you believe is really inhibiting the good in mobile for good.
I think the first issue, and I very much agree with many of the comments made, is scale. So there's wonderful experimentation happening around the world, but it's not being scaled. Dealing with the question, I think it will be a revolution, but I think it will be a peaceful revolution. Accountability and transparency, the sanitizing effect of information can be remarkable. I've seen it. I've seen it transform teachers turning up at schools in Uganda, or people transforming their lives through health information in India, and many, many other examples. But these remain experimental rather than mainstreamed across society. What's happening with M-Pesa in Kenya is quite remarkable, but hasn't even reached London. And let alone the rest of the world. I think it will. I think the other thing that needs to happen is that you need to use this as a tool to hold their governments accountable. So we'll know whether it's a corporate, what the reputational and accountability issues are. If people say that what they're doing is the fact, we need to see it in real time. And we can see it. There are projects now which will track diamonds from the ground to the jeweler, using mobile technologies to make sure that they clean diamonds. We can do the same in many, many other areas of life. And I believe that it's us using these tools to hold our leaders responsible that's going to create the Westphalian Revolution.
Okay.
So I think two things. Firstly, there are many intermediaries in our societies who do not yet feel confident users of the new digital tools. So just as we had the freedom of the press, the spread of the printing press, pamphleteering, democracy, we need the spread of real empowerment, which doesn't mean I've got a Twitter account, it means I know how to use this in my society. The second is we have to have a vision that is about a positive transformation of the roles and responsibilities in our world. It's no longer about big government, more efficient government, the same budget. It's about redefining who's going to look after the aging community in such a way that the current health budget is not being spent 80% on the last 6 months of everybody's lives, which is what's happening today.
Do people, just your first point, do people become naturally become digitally literate? Or is this something the government must do much more to encourage?
Well, somebody's got to do it. I mean, I think I've been talking to colleagues from Vodafone about this. How do we get into the middle stand economy? How do we get into the SME economy in such a way that every small business leader wants to go from what the Boston Consulting Group calls no web to high web status, integrating the digital reality in their business processes? If they do that, they grow, but they don't quite know how to. They need a little bit of clever hand-holding, and it can transform businesses in Connemara, it can transform businesses in Scotland. Paradoxically, it's in towns around Europe that probably SMEs are still muddling through. So that you can't get this high-end literacy just by playing with your mobile.
What's inhibiting the good in mobile for good?
I think it's to do with our cultural attitudes. The technology is ahead of our cultural change. The definition of democracy, transparency, information and privacy, the debate is still rooted in one which comes from a view of the world that's 50 years out of date. And we've got to get much more sophisticated in understanding that. You know, you take something like healthcare records. You can anonymize healthcare records and you can get amazing information that can be helped to make treatment outcomes better and research. Yet that's a major debate. We need to move on beyond these sort of things so that we understand what really is an issue in some of these areas and what isn't, rather than having the kind of knee-jerk reaction which comes from an age which is now past. You know, things have changed. We need to get over that change and let our frameworks catch up with what the technology is now enabling.
John?
I think it's still probably mostly government. I think what Ian just said is true. You've seen all these amazing videos about what M-Pesa has done. The staggering thing about M-Pesa is partly how great it's been, but also how ridiculous the excuses which governments in other places have come up with in order to protect local monopolies, to do with banking reform and all those sort of things, or to do with banking regulations, in order to stop those sort of services getting into very poor countries. And that is a scandal, and it's nearly always, frankly, related to the fact that their brother-in-law or sister-in-law runs the local bank, and the idea that all these things could get taken away from them is awful. And so I think it is mainly government. I do think there is something involving the gap between people like Mike, who are on the ability to be able to create these things, and the rest of us with the ability to be able to use them. I think there is a definite barrier between the two, in the sense that one group of people are coming up with ideas, another group of people, certainly including myself, who use mobile technology but don't entirely, I wouldn't entirely trust myself to deliver a cow with it, if I put it that way.
Just the last question to all of you then. If we agree that the governments to a certain extent are getting in the way at present or aren't doing enough, I hear a takeaway for governments from that. But how do you better encourage partnerships then between other stakeholders? Who should they be? Should it be large firms working with small firms? Should you just encourage the big firms to just go at things? I mean, at the end of the day, when we're talking about good, we've seen, I think as we all agree, so little achieved at this point. So what happens next? What's the best route? Ian?
Yeah, just before we kill government altogether, it's true in the mobile space that the system can develop incredibly rapidly without government, but that's a real exception. You're not going to get rural water supply or rural roads or rural hospitals without effective governments. And so it's how do you use the mobile space to make governments more effective rather than how do you get rid of governments, I think is the interesting conversation. In order to scale it, I think we need much more stable systems. I think there's a real fear that these things lead to instability in a system sense. So if it collapses, what's the effect? If it's cyber, what's the effect? And I think it's absolutely vital that we ensure that the partnerships are based on real needs. So no parachuting. They will emerge. These partnerships are organic. There's all the information out there, and I'm very, very optimistic that there'll be all sorts. When you look at the network of partnerships, and I showed one slide of that, it's quite remarkable. now using new platforms, how small individuals in a small town in the US are funding projects in small towns in India. These partnerships emerge if you create the vibrant ecosystem for them.
Yeah, partnerships, I think we'd agree, are organic, but it's how you create some scale going forward.
So I think you have to go to a real place with real people. And I think the challenge for something like the Vodafone Foundation, I guess, is to say, so in a middle-sized town somewhere in an unsexy part of this country, can we find the other actors and find out what are the needs in that community and show how mobile can fix all of them? And at a European Union level, we're trying also to do that, to say, well, let's go to a city and say, what does it take to be smart? Let's go to a health area and say, can you have an integrated solution, e-prescription, pain management, telemedicine? And we miss that sort of sense of place. And I think it's the sense of place, especially in Europe, which will take us back to communities and keep it true.
What are you doing to mobilise the European Commission, as it were?
Well, I mean, the European Commission is feeling pretty mobilised. I have a boss who keeps me mobilised. I think what we're trying to do is precisely that, to say, okay, we've talked strategically, we've got lots of strategy, we have a lovely narrative. Where are the places where we can test it? And any single process or app is not going to change people's lives. So you need to go into a community and find a whole millefeuille of apps and solutions to the problems they have. Some communities will say it's about schools, some will say it's the hospital, some will say it's broken windows, and mobile can help to fix all of that, but you've got to do it in the order that the local community wants. So you have to switch the roles and responsibilities. And too many people, I think, we're now at that tipping point where everybody knows they want to do it. CSR is booming, Mobile for Good is booming, but we have to have the actors also get together and say, let's do it together and make sure it lasts.